This is Breaking Down Security, and I am Brian Brake. Welcome back, listener. This is Brian, Mr. Betcher, and Miss Berlin for Breaking Down Security.
Yo.
Hello.
How is everybody doing today?
Fantastic.
Oh, yeah? You sound like you're outside,
No.
Miss Berlin. Why would that be?
I'm on my front porch because of technical difficulties.
You need to get better internet.
I have amazing internet. I have a shitty computer.
Oh, what happened?
So I switched jobs.
Oh.
And had to send back my MacBook Pro 2 days ago.
Oh.
And I've been using my Windows 10 box, and it is a gigantic piece of shit compared to the MacBook.
How do you really feel about it?
And I'm very sad and angry. And I'm currently shopping for MacBook Pros as we podcast.
Well, that'll be okay. I mean, get you something fully loaded with one of them ugly touch bar things. You'll be good to go. So
I was thinking about going for last year's. I don't really want the touch bar.
Yeah, me neither. So where are you starting at? You said you left your current job and now you're at a new joint?
I do. Yeah, I start Monday. Today's Friday? Yeah, I start Monday and with Networks Group in Ann Arbor, Michigan.
Networks Group. Okay.
And I am a senior security analyst.
Very nice. Very nice.
Yep.
Okay. Very nice.
That's my big reveal.
That's awesome. Yeah, we knew about that last week, but we couldn't say anything because we were under embargo. So, yeah.
Right.
We're under NDA.
Right. NDA. Complete NDA. Yeah.
I was under.
But that's
I
over.
didn't want to get fired yet.
It expired.
Yep. Abruptly, from what I understand.
Do NDAs usually have an expiration date? Or they go forever?
It depends on the the contract.
I think our next guest would know that.
Who's our next guest?
Huh?
Oh, that's right. Our next guest. Michael Gough is here.
We have a guest?
Yeah. We should probably bring him on.
Hi, Michael.
Because, you can say something now.
Something now.
Ah, there you go. Okay. So for those of you who don't know who Michael is, he's been on several times. There will be some links in the show notes to various discussions that we've had with him about malware and infections and loggings and things. So what does it brings you to our side of the hood, Mr. Gough, tonight?
Side of the hood. Well, Betcher and I were talking the other day, and we kind of stumbled across something, actually a couple things of recent with the Windows 10 anniversary update and then the Now Creators update. And there's been one in between the two. And in the course of doing some of our work, stumbled across something that compliance actually hurt us. And so between the compliance hurting us and Microsoft doing some funky updates with Windows 10, we're having some struggles with things that security people often recommend and do. And we tell people to do, we recommend people to do, we do talks to tell people to do this, and Microsoft undoes it, and compliance isn't good enough. So that's what we're going to talk about. Well, anything else you want to talk about?
Okay. No, that's cool. We have a link in the show notes to the tweets, but I'll go ahead and read them. So it says, the first one was, what gives Microsoft your Windows 10 upgrades, reversing security settings, disabling logs, lowering log sizes, and undoing file auditing. And that was part 1 of 2. And it's like, and undoing file associations, which we've talked about before and we'll talk about again. Your upgrades are breaking purposefully set security tweaks we make for a more secure Windows. And then you had a third one that says, looks like folder auditing also gets undone with the latest upgrade. And you're basically blowing up Microsoft because they don't really give a shit. They're just some 20-somethings that tweet out, the latest, product. So they don't really care. GPO isn't the answer. Checking and not changing is. So, That's okay. So that's a bad. Does this only affect Windows 10, or does it affect all Windowses?
It affects Windows 10 because of the automatic updates that Microsoft is providing consumers as a benefit because apparently they don't know how to patch. Well, there's
Mm-hmm.
a reason that patching needs to be controlled, and this is probably a great example
Great.
where Microsoft's trying to keep people patched better by not giving you an option in Windows 10. They're giving you an update. It's including enhancements to the operating system. You get all kinds of cool little tweaks and interfaces. Recently, the command shell changed to PowerShell, for example. And they're doing this automatically without your ability to override it when you're not in an enterprise environment, which is a lot of people. And so this,
including enterprises.
yeah, including enterprises, right? A lot of enterprises do not run enterprise, and these kind of updates, if they're not strictly controlled, will definitely undo some settings that a lot of us security people recommend. And it's been surprising how many settings have actually been affected by this. And I'm kind of surprised that really nobody's seen this. I tweeted it out with the anniversary update. At that point, found a couple of them, but now we're up to like 5 settings that are fairly well used by folks. It's a pretty standard thing to do for those of us that want to do good incident response and good logging and just some good best practices, especially with the ransomware attacks. And they're breaking it all when they do these massive updates.
Now, did you want to come on just because you listened to last week's where we talked about that guy from Computer World talking about disabling Windows Update, and then this happened, or was this something that was you already knew about ahead of time?
Already knew about ahead of time. It's becoming too constant. Like this is the third major update they've released in the past year since the anniversary update where we've noticed this. Brian and I, Betcher and I have seen this unfortunately occur to us in the lab where we'll launch a piece of malware on a Windows 10 lab box and suddenly it's not recording some things that it should record. And we're like, what the hell? And you can tell when they do these major updates because something on your interface changes. That's how you kind of know something's amiss.
Yeah. Well, okay.
They don't make it real obvious.
So with Windows 10, it's like you're basically downloading an entire operating system again and installing it over the top. So you're starting with a cherry laptop again, basically, with the exception of whatever's in your documents and settings and whatever. So it would stand to reason that all these updates are going to break something. And you said that this is happening not only at home but in the enterprise. At home, I can understand because 99.9% of people are not going to be changing file associations and whatever. This is a consumer PC. In the enterprise, shouldn't you be using GPOs to set this policy stuff, not per box going in and clicking, in local security settings?
Well, let's back up a little bit. Home users, with the outbreak of ransomware and obviously with WannaCry and NotPetya, and last couple of days has been a lot of chatter about a new Locky variant. We saw some come through from emails getting caught. And with that happening, there's been a lot of people talking about, hey, what can we do about this? What can we do about this? Maersk just reported a $300 million loss due to this WannaCry outbreak that they got nailed by.
Yep.
300 million, man, it'll buy a lot of security. And so for the past, 6 months, Betcher, I've been doing presentations. At first, I thought, really, people are still having problems with ransomware. And we kind of discovered in doing malware testing, because that's the outcome of any lab testing, is you should say, how can I take what I've learned here and improve my security? And file associations happens to be one of them. And it is something I have recommended and I do to people's home system so that they can double click one of these stupid emails they might get from somebody's account that's compromised and they don't get infected. So I think it's important that even though home users are consumer products, this affects home, it affects pro, it affects education, and so it affects all of the versions of Windows that are available out there. I happen to run all 3 of those, and all 3 of those have been broken by these Windows 10 updates. So it's kind of an across-the-board problem. And if we're trying to secure grandma and mom and dad and daughters and kids, we're probably all running Windows Home. And this is something we should be able to do. I'm actually very dumbfounded that Microsoft hasn't fixed this themselves, because even Google doesn't allow these file types to transmit across Gmail anymore. And it's pretty typical that most of us who have any email security block these file types all because they're ransomware. So just because something's consumer, I think most of us in our homes, most of us on our laptops, maybe even Amanda's with Windows running on it, we all have this ability to tweak, and we should be able to do it. And in no way should Microsoft ever undo a setting like that. There is a purposeful reason that these settings are being changed, and they should check for these and not change them.
No, I understand that.
It's almost like by doing this, they want you to get infected, right? Because you're doing these things to prevent the double click, the, mom getting an email and double clicking a JS and then getting ransomware, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then bye-bye all your pictures. And it's like Windows is saying, yeah, we know better. You're going to want to double click these JS files in Windows Home, and potentially get yourself in trouble.
Does this also get rid of things like privacy settings or host files? Like if you had a custom host file that was blocking all that telemetry stuff that's being sent to Microsoft, does it overwrite that stuff as well?
I haven't come across that because I'm not spending a lot of time on the privacy settings. In the labs, we leave the stuff pretty default. We're recognizing some of the failures in the lab because some of the extra things we add to the box at home, where I've turned the stuff off, I'm definitely recognizing it. I imagine that in the privacy settings, there's probably something that's adjusted as well.
Yeah.
But these are human interface settings that potentially I think that Microsoft might leave alone because people said no, I don't want to do this. But somebody's gonna have to verify whether or not the privacy settings are involved. They won't break necessarily the kind of stuff we're talking about. I hear a car in the background.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't I can't speak for the privacy settings, but I wouldn't be surprised that someone will find something that Microsoft undoes.
Yeah. All right. So.
So yeah, they. I don't understand. Maybe it's a mistake that they're resetting everything back to defaults against our will when they do these updates. I'm hoping that's the case, but we haven't had a response yet. So
I don't think you'll get a response either, to be honest.
Well, I've reached out to a couple of people I know at Microsoft that are very well known, and we'll see what kind of response they get. But I've kind of gotten to the point after getting some emails, some of the tweets that people have responded back to. One of them was, seems that Microsoft's the virus. Here we are setting these things per, security experts' recommendations, and Microsoft's turning them off, which, opens us up to massive ransomware, for example.
Yeah.
And this easy tweak with the file associations to change, JS, JSE, WSF, WSH, VBE, VBS, and PIF and HTA to not execute the host engine and just open a notepad kills these ransomwares and file types that people get emailed from actually detonating. They just open in an editor, and the fact that Microsoft's turning that off is shocking.
Yeah.
There's a reason. It's in the GUI. It's in control panel. You can set it. Why in the world are they putting it back when users just don't need these settings? For example, just in the case of the file association.
Okay. So, I know Miss Amanda's running on her brand new or her fancy Windows 10 box, but
don't update.
Don't.
There was actually a tweet as well I got that said I went back to Windows 7 because of these updates undoing some of the changes they made. So even people are undoing their Windows 10 upgrades and going back to 7 because they want some control over what gets borked.
Yeah. We need like a hashtag. Maybe we could get some giant community outreach started with millions of people. Who knows?
Yeah, possibly, but this needs to change. This is significantly reducing the security and/or incident response capabilities that a lot of us do to systems in the enterprise, whether we're using. And not everything is GPO control. I know one time a response to Microsoft about something else I tweeted said, "Well, isn't that what GPO's for?" There's a lot of systems that aren't in GPO. There's a lot of standalones, a lot of kiosks, a lot of things, a lot of test machines, that VMs that are not in GPO control, and we have base builds. Everybody has a gold image, not everybody, but a lot of people have gold images they build things from, and these settings are turned on or added in the case. And then this major upgrade comes and they apply some security policy or whatever it is, default setting, and bam, log sizes go back to defaults where we set them for a gig. They set them to 89K. I mean, gig 89K, yeah, that's reasonable. Not really. A gig will get you 7 days. They're giving us less than a day with their settings. If you turn everything on, we tell you to turn on. And then they've actually adjusted the security policy to turn auditing on directories we've turned on. That's another thing that blows my mind. I've turned file and directory auditing on. What are you doing disabling that? And then we turn on task scheduler log. We enable the task scheduler log because everything's task scheduled now, and malware uses the task scheduler. So we want to log that, and they disable that log and a couple others. The DNS drivers information, the driver's information log and DNS client logs. All these that are disabled by default, we turn on, they turn back off in these upgrades. Yeah. So they are actually breaking good security things that we do, all to keep us so-called patched and whatever you call it, usability improvements.
Conformant.
Conformant.
All right, so you've got a whole laundry list of things that we were, you said had been enabled or disabled, and so let's say you can't do it with GPO. We're doing our. I bring this up because I'm cross promoting, but we're doing the Mick Douglas class with PowerShell, and he was showing us a bunch of stuff about how blue teamers and incident responders can use PowerShell to do various things. Is this something that you could have run on a regular basis to make sure that these settings stay in place? Now that we know that upgrading these will cause upgrading your Windows 10 will cause these to revert back to what the default settings are, and so you mentioned that the log file sizes on the hosts are 1 gig, and now they've been set back to 89K. Aren't you doing centralized logging? So largely, logs sitting on a host is useless space being used?
Well, I'd like to know how many corporations are logging all their endpoints, and they don't. So one of the challenges I think a lot of corporations have when we talk about logging is we have to get them to enable stuff that has not been enabled. Microsoft by default doesn't enable squat. If you look at the CIS benchmark and you enable everything they tell you, it gets you partially the way there, and we're going to talk about the failure of that in a minute. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, in the course of developing LogMD, we look for a couple additional settings because they dramatically improve your logging capability to the point where it's as good as any other security tool, if not better, by collecting this information. The problem is it creates voluminous information for a log management solution. The amount of data that a endpoint would collect now, if you turn on the Windows firewall and you turn on process command line logging and you turn on the PowerShell stuff and you suck all that into log management, you have to have a ginormous license if you're all big. If you're small, no big deal, but if you're ginormous, it's going to create a lot of data, which means you're going to have to spend a lot of work pruning that data. Mm-hmm. So not everybody will do the endpoints. Generally, they kind of do high-level high-risk systems, internet-facing systems, servers that are important, but workstations generally not so much. So if we could at least turn them on, we have the ability, for example, let's say you had a log management solution that did have a license restriction and you investigated somebody, you could already push out the log management endpoint, the client that collects it, the syslog agent, the universal forwarder, the NX log, whatever, and then throw the workstation into a GPO that would enable it, so you would then start collecting those 1, 3, 5, 10 machines that you think something happened on, and for a short period of time collect that into log management. So you want that collecting so you can get some history, and 1 gig will give you about 7 days with our recommended settings with the Windows logging cheat sheet, and probably about maybe 10 days, maybe a little more with the CIS benchmarks. And so you want that history so that when 1, 2, 3 days later you go to address this issue, the data's in the local logs that you can suck up. If you can't suck them up into log management, then you're going to do something like LogMD. You're going to push it out with a SSCM or BigFix or PowerShell or however you want to push it out, and then you'll collect the logs manually and aggregate them in some central server location and then go through the data. So no matter what the configuration is, you want local logs collecting. A week is not a lot. So setting it at a gig, setting the security log at a gig, and sysmon if you're using it. Again, don't recommend that in the enterprise. That has some ill effects with antivirus. But if you are using sysmon for investigation purposes, that too needs to be a gig. That's a lot of data. So you at least want it locally. So if you have to investigate, the data was collected, and you have 5, 6, 7 days to react to whatever incident you're going after.
You keep an eye on this, Amanda, for your new job, because what are you going to be doing in your job? Helping build out the blue team?
Yeah. Yep. So not only helping build out the blue team, but doing a lot of red versus blue attack simulation and working with Carbon Black.
Okay. So
Well, then I
Who's
guess
our Carbon Black partner.
I guess the easy answer that I said at Hack Miami at my keynote is, for the love of God, please have the red team do blue team logging with the Windows logging cheat sheets and see what it is they're actually generating. Not enough red teamers are actually properly logging to see what kind of noise they actually make, which is surprisingly a lot. There's your tip for the day, Amanda. Okay. Not that you didn't know that.
Yeah, hopefully,
but the listeners may not know that.
Okay, so the one thing I do want to say is, though, you do want to do your updates. You just have to be aware of the fact that these changes are going to occur if you have these specific things set up. It's still good to go ahead and do the patching, right?
Right. There's a challenge, though. One of the settings that they're borking, like the event logs, no big deal. You can GPO that, or you can create a script. So I actually wrote a script this morning to send to my friend Dan, who said, hey, am I going to have to check for this every time I patch? I'm like, well, you can create a batch file, stick a shortcut in the startup folder, or the run key, whatever you want to do, schedule task, a batch file. And I gave him a sample that set all the file associations. His big concern is the ransomware. So I said, here's the script that'll turn all the things to Notepad, and you can just create a batch file. And every time the system starts, no matter what happened to the patching, it will set those back the way they were. And every time you log in, it'll set them. So before the user can click on anything, at least they'll be opening Notepad. Yeah. You'll have to do the same thing with the enabling of the logs, the task schedule logs, DNS logs, a couple other logs that we look at in LogMD. You'll have to, again, and set those to automatically enable, whether they're enabled or not. The one trick is the file auditing, which was real surprising in this last creator update. It broke my I basically do a folder audit, or folder and all subfolders of my app data local and my app data roaming, right? This is the percent app data variable that malware takes advantage of, and percent temp that malware takes advantage of and drops their foo to, or creates a directory from. And so we audit that for file drops for ads, not reads and stuff, especially in the lab, which is where one of the times we noticed that, hey, where's all of our file drops? They're not on here. And so they turn that off. The problem is those have to be set once a user logs in. So now you have to think about it as, okay, how do I set that via PowerShell or some other way, set ACLs or whatnot in the course of a login script. And so this is a very user-specific problem. And so you'll have to think of that as well. Log sizes are a registry tweak, so the batch file could definitely deal with that. But you're talking a batch file now to set 5 different items that Microsoft breaks every time they do one of these updates. That's kind of ridiculous to do that. And you're at a risk during the period of time. Let's say it patches on Friday night, you come in Monday morning, and there's an event over the weekend, you potentially will have lost quite a bit of data because they've disabled these settings.
So the creator update is they called it like Redstone. So it's like an updated version of Windows. This doesn't happen with like the monthly patches, right?
Doesn't seem to. I've only noticed it 3 times since the anniversary update did it. The creator update definitely did it, and then there was one just I don't know if it was a pre-creator
fall
update.
Creators, yeah.
So there's been 2 within the last 2 months. We noticed this occurring actually in our big endpoint evaluation that we had, that all of a sudden all our labs were rebooting and stuff broke, and we're like, ugh. And then recently this last week, I got an update and stuff broke. So they've had a couple. I don't know if it's because they're staggering them or whatnot. But I've seen it 3 times in the course of the past, since the anniversary update. The first time I recognized it was the anniversary update. It's the first time I've ever had a problem with it.
Yeah. I'm actually looking for something, because I thought that they were going to move to like this quarterly like Uber update thing, like the creator update, or the they called it Redstone, which is now the creator update. Kind of like how Java does their CPUs, where they're just going to have like all the new hotness come out every quarter, and then they're going to have like monthly updates in between. So you may not have to do this for everything. You may have to check it every quarter to make sure that because basically you're downloading a brand new OS and it's being built from scratch. That's what I'm equating it to. You're just getting basically a fresh install of Windows every time you do this.
Yeah, it doesn't quite do that. I mean, all your programs and everything, your data is all fine.
Yeah.
They're definitely making OS changes. I guess they're applying some sort of security policy or base setting that they're applying, and it's causing all this grief.
Yeah.
The challenge obviously is Windows 10. Windows 7, this definitely does not occur on. I have not had the issue in Windows 7 at all, but Windows 10 definitely have. We have to keep in mind too that. The fact that this is going to happen without warning, and you have basically 7 days upon that. What's if people all of a sudden forget about this? Suddenly they're at a loss. I mean, the Windows logging cheat sheets, if you follow them, they've been around for holy moly, 4 years, 5 years, telling you to enable these things, and people have done it. I get every con I go to, someone says something about the Windows logging cheat sheets. Matter of fact, the Dell guy was at recently talking to us, and he said, one of our guys that lives here in Austin said, "Hey, I ran into a client that's using your cheat sheets." And so if you follow these cheat sheets and you set these things, a Windows 10 update's going to frickin' undo them.
Yeah.
It's just, to me, it's like, what? So now suddenly there's going to have to be a new effort from my part to educate people on this, to say, oh, by the way, you're going to have to write a batch file or a PowerShell script to set these items in a automated sense, task schedule, whatever, because Microsoft's going to bork them. And if you want these settings to continue to be set, you're going to have to make sure you GPO it. So get these things turned on. And generally, these are not things you would GPO. You'd set them in a base build and you forget about them.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that's not the case now.
Could you set some kind of service or something, like create a security service or something that would always be monitoring for these changes? Or
I suppose someone could write one to do this. I mean, what's Microsoft? I mean, make it modular so that you can add an additional item, because I suppose someone's going to come up with another recommendation for Windows, and they're going to break that too.
Yeah.
So yeah, if someone wants to write that, go for it. I'll definitely contribute to it and what should be in there.
Cool.
But I think right now a simple script will do it, and then that script can translate to people to flipping the bits in GPO for those GPO controlled scenarios. But there's a lot of, like, what do you do for mom, dad, daughter, kid, wife, accounting firm, chiropractor, all these places that I've turned it on for people that suddenly now it's not working.
Yeah. So, okay. So I got out of doing IT for my family a long time ago on purpose, because it was not worth the headache. And I apologize to my family. Well, they're not listening, so it doesn't matter.
Your mistake is you communicated with them that you're doing this. I just do it and don't tell them. I go to my wife's office. I go to all their PCs. I make these changes. I leave. Nobody knows anything. All I know is I won't get a call. I got ransomware. What do I do?
That sounds like a larger security
They're not going to get the ransomware because I made these changes. Don't. They're all Windows 10 now. Oh, crap. I have to go back now and put a batch file with a scheduled task job in place. Yeah, that's just not acceptable for Microsoft to make such a monumental flaw.
I think you poking around on somebody's computer systems that you don't own is probably a bigger security issue at your wife's company, isn't it?
Well, she is an accountant in the firm, and I do know the owner, so.
Okay. Well, I'm not judging, but I judged, so I apologize. So.
And my chiropractor, well, I don't want them getting ransomware because, when she's adjusting me and she's pissed off, I don't really want her to take it out of me because I'm the security guy that didn't tell her to do this. You did this for me. Why did I get ransomware? Because Microsoft undid it. Yeah, that's not going to fly. I'll have to find a new chiropractor, and I like
Understood.
my chiropractor.
Understood. Okay, so Miss Amanda's building out her blue team. And you mentioned also at the beginning of this parts where compliance failed you.
Yeah, shocking. This is something I didn't really expect. Let's go back in time. So when I was at HP, I actually contributed to the Center for Internet Security benchmark program. One of my achievements with that group was to get the HPUX benchmarks reordered to match the other UXs and Linux benchmarks, the order in which HPUX was done was for some reason different. And so if you wrote a script, a bash script, which I did, I created a hardening methodology for HP, and my scripts went, item number one, item number two, section one, one to blah blah blah, section two, blah 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 blah. HP was completely opposite. I mean, it was just completely screwed up. So we got the committee to agree. They realigned everything, and then I went after the Windows portion, because one of the flaws with the Windows benchmarks at the time were the items in the benchmark did not align in the order in which we're in Active Directory. So as I was doing these engagements and my people were doing the engagements, I led this huge engagement which had every OS. People were making mistakes because they were having to read an item in the benchmark, go over to a system and set it, and they were going back and forth, and they had to jump all over GPO or all over the benchmarks. And if you were to look at 10 systems, 2 or 3 of them were wrong because there was no logical order. The benchmark did not match GPO where you were setting these. So the order was just mucked up and needed to be reorganized to match GPO. And I did not get very far before I left HP with that. They've since made some adjustments. And so so the backstory is I was involved with them pretty heavily. I also gave input to their scoring tool that they had. I had to make some changes there because we found some faux pas in automating that, and the developers and I worked together to solve that problem. And so I'm pretty intimate understanding with these benchmarks. And so a lot of people use these as a standard that they will apply in GPO to say, hey, I want some level of acceptable, security, whether it's OS hardening or whatnot. And in the course of running into somebody who actually applied the CIS benchmarks for Windows 7, we found when we tried to run logmd to investigate a box that logmd failed. And we're like, that's not possible. Well, it is, because we know if you look at when you run logmd, you get a report that says, here's the CIS benchmarks at 7, 8, and whatnot, and the US GCBs and the Aussie Cyber Standards and the Windows login cheat sheet. And you can see across each line of what these recommend and what your system's set to and what the Windows login cheat sheet does. And there were about 5 settings in CIS that we utilize in logmd that a lot of IR people would want you to turn on. It's not uncommon. These are, and we'll talk about them in a second. These are very useful and very appropriate settings that literally produce, a vast amount of incident response and forensics data. And again, you turn it on for every system to collect locally. You wouldn't necessarily need to log management or anything. And so here's a place that thinks they're doing a good job, and now you have to tell them, yeah, about that CIS benchmark hardcore standard that you got there. Yeah, it's not good enough, and here's what can happen if you don't change these. And so that's what we found in the course of just investigating somebody and finding that logmd did not work on a CIS enforced machine. And then you tell them, can you adjust these? Well, why? We're compliant to the benchmark. It's not good enough to do real incident response and forensics. So if you do want to do it, you need to adjust these. And so that's how that came about. And one of the things, and so here's a position where I think compliance people look at it and say, I'm compliant to the benchmark, I'm good. And really, the problem here is that they're taking the benchmark as a maximum setting, not a minimum setting. And it's not like the benchmark says, set it at a minimum of blah, 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 blah. It's either kind of an on or set it at this. There's not really a lot of discussion about why it needs to be different or the impact of it being different. So I think I'm going to need to harass some CIS folks once I figure out who's there anymore and see if I can start the conversation and either get some footnotes added, because there are some footnotes. John Rutan and I had written a wireless security article for them as a part of their initial release of wireless benchmark in order to educate about some additional items or explanations of it, because we felt the benchmark wasn't enough. There needed to be some explanation. And so I'm hoping maybe something like that can occur so we can explain to the people, because again, compliance and auditors will look at this as an absolute, as a maximum. Yeah, but I'm compliant, right? Check, moving on. Not as what's really practical or really what an IR firm or an IR person or forensics person really needs to have set. And there is no impact to the user or environment here. It will create log management data without a doubt. It'll collect more data, turn on more data that if you were collecting all of it in log management, you will have to do a little work, but not a lot. I mean, it's a pretty simple set.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the take from it. And I was kind of surprised. And so Betcher and I had a conversation when I found this. I'm like, wow, compliance actually hurts you. And here's how. So we're going to talk about that.
See, I have a problem with the CIS benchmarks myself. I think that they need to be revamped for the most part, because I've been using them. Oh, and thank you for the HPUX CIS benchmarks. I used to apply those when I was in the Navy. It was awful. HPUX is just an awful operating system to begin with. So one of the
It's
things.
not. Did you know a lot of the UXs use some of the HPUX code? It was actually licensed out to IBM and Solaris.
Yeah, the CDE,
you know.
the CDE desktop was just
Yeah, the patching stuff.
Gross. I have a problem with them because the way that we build computers these days, at least Linux boxes, we don't separate partitions anymore. And one of the requirements of the CIS benchmarks is, var has to have its own partition, varlog has to have its own partition, temp has to have its own partition, and I'm like, in the world of AWS and in the world of instances and containerization, nobody's going to build them like that.
You've also have you amended a box because you turned something on like HPUX auditing and there wasn't a big enough var volume and it bended on you?
Yeah, I've never had to worry about that because all of ours came pre-built from SpayWar. So that's the only experience I have is pre-built systems that came from SpayWar System Center over in San Diego. But it used to be is like, oh yeah, you've got to make sure you have all these set, and then there's 150 settings to make sure that each of the partitions you just created have no SUID, no dev, no whatever. I don't think any of that stuff needs to apply anymore. And the problem is with a lot of our
there's definitely
compliance,
changes. They don't update as nearly as they are. For example, in the Windows logging cheat sheet, when Microsoft turned on command line logging as an option for Windows 8.1 by default and Windows 2012 R2 by default was back in 2013, what year is it? 2012, 2014, 2013. In 2014, in April of 2014, they enabled the same settings for Windows 7. So we're only talking 3 years ago for Windows 7, but they shipped 8.1 with I think the first service pack and Windows 2012 R2 with this setting. And command line logging is, basically it's the base of what a lot of IR tools are looking at, right? They're looking at process execution and the command line that comes out of it. It's a lot of the ETDRs are doing this, right? Looking at the kernel, watching the actual trace logging and doing that.
Yeah.
So all of these tools are doing this, but yet CIS benchmark has yet to even add it as an option or a discussion point. It's almost 5 years old. Wow. So that's just one example that the most valuable setting you can turn on in Windows is command line logging. Nothing else even comes close other than Windows Firewall, which, by the way, is one of the items that isn't turned on or recommended in the CIS benchmark.
Yeah.
And that combination is incredibly valuable, but yet the benchmark doesn't address it. With today's CPUs and SSDs and faster spindles, Betcher's constantly quoting the Microsoft's articles about the impact of full DNS logging and how it does less than 1/2 CPU or 1/2% CPU or something.
Yeah, if you do a 500 million DNS logs per second or queries per second, something outrageous like that, it'll increase your CPU 5%. If you log everything.
That's not a lot.
Ridiculous.
So Intel's kind of solved this problem. Disk drives have solved this problem. And so I know that was a discussion point in the course of the benchmarks. If you even look back older benchmarks of Windows 7 and XP, there were a lot more items where we had a lot more things turned on. The problem is it broke a lot of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Matter of fact, DLL sideloading was actually attempted to be corrected by Microsoft in Windows 7 and 8.1 by release, and Windows 7 SP2, and they had to disable it, where you have to force the DLL to be loaded from System32, not another place. So they actually tried to fix that. And so some of these additional enhanced settings, the privileged use settings and things like that, used to be in the benchmarks. They took them out to make them more of a, this will pretty much work for everybody kind of mentality. But they failed to discuss some of the additional things you can do that will really help you. And they really haven't updated in 5 years. I have to assume across UX this is a common problem as well, and they haven't really created a OS for the cloud, or a OS for IR and forensics. An
Yeah.
optimal kind of condition
Well,
settings where they might be more like the Windows logging cheat sheet. So
they
yeah,
they
they do need overhauling.
they do have like application based ones that you can have. So let me ask you a question. What came first, though? I mean, because there's other hardening standards out there. There's the STIG that is used by the DoD, the U.S. Department of Defense, or DISA, the CIS benchmarks, of course, and then you've got things like Oval and SCAP. That if you look at the Oval and the SCAP stuff, and I've been looking at it recently because we're trying to do this FedRAMP thing, and our compliance people say, well, CIS is nice, but Oval and SCAP are so much better. And I'm looking at them, I'm like, they're the exact same as the CIS. They just have a different numbering scheme for the most part.
Yeah, and there's probably a mapping at the end of it, or somebody's
There
done
is.
a mapping. If you
There
look
is.
at NIST 853 with the USGCBs, which are the detailed documents that tell you, setting by setting what to set, which is why LogMD uses the USGCBs, because they're very specific.
My whole problem is that, you've got people like red teamers who come in and they're going to be testing this stuff, and you're not going to strike fear into their hearts when you tell them, well, we're CIS compliant, or we're following all the SCAP stuff. They're not going to quake in ever loving fear by the fact that you've got all the SCAP stuff enabled on the box.
It's actually a bad thing to tell them that, because what you're just done, based on what we're about to discuss and indeed the details, is they know what they can do. For example, lateral movement will not get caught.
Yeah.
That is one of the things that the benchmarks fail you on. If you're net using around so I'm a pen tester and I want to put as many flags on as many systems as I can. I'm going to pop some box, right? I'm going to give you that initial execution because I want to see what happens after that. And you're going to crawl, net use, and you're not going to collect squat because they don't recommend you do detailed file share or file share object access or file system object access. So you can fricking go crawling around the environment because auditing is not going to be turned on and it's not going to catch you doing these share connections and file drops.
No. So is that on the level
really
2?
bad.
Is that level 2 CIS benchmarks, or is that just with the level 1 doesn't have that, but level 2 addresses it, or is it doesn't address it at all?
No, they're not in it. They're considered to be not applicable or not no auditing is what the recommendation is at a CIS. I know.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask, is if they actually recommended you do the opposite of what you should be doing, or if they just don't address it.
No, they address it. They tell you specifically no auditing. They tell you no auditing on detailed file share, file share. So detailed file share is what happens when you net use. File share is when you connect to a said file share, CDAL or whatever. File system is the auditing file directory, whatever. So the app data local thing I talked about that Microsoft breaks as a course of the Windows 10 update. And filter platform connection. So this is what tells you, right? This is the Windows firewall. This is what tells you. This is what tells you that the application is talking to IP, whatever. So it's not just NetFlow that says IPA is talking to IPB. This tells you that malware.exe is talking to Russia or another box in the environment. There's a really good mapping that occurs there. It's highly useful, and no auditing is the recommendation here, which is awful.
Can you send us those or add those to the show notes that way? Because we're doing the CIS benchmarks right now, and I'd love to be able to have this kind of information for my compliance people when I tell them we're not going to add this, or we're going to have to, go beyond what we have. Yeah,
what you're going to find is your pen testers are going to know you can't detect for this, and they're gonna exploit it.
Yeah.
Carlos Perez has a Metasploit module that specifically looks at the type of logging that I recommend you turn on. Another former ex-HPer friend of mine.
Oh, shit.
And so this is what they do, right? They see and find these kinds of compliance, CIS. They're not going to quake in their boots because they know exactly what's set and what's not, and they're going to say, "Oh, we have to do it this way. Oh, we have to do it this way," and they won't log a damn thing. And that's the concern here of why these things need to be addressed and updated, because pen testers and bad guys, as I saw in APT, one of the reasons the Windows logging cheat sheet occurred was to fix the auditing so that we could catch the Chinese crawling around in the environment, and that's how the Windows logging cheat sheet came to be 5 years ago. So yeah, we can share this and definitely get it out in the show notes and say, go ahead and set the CIS stuff, but also set these.
Yeah. Amanda, you need to tell your red teamers that's 5 quick wins that they can use to, get your
big
new
time.
job.
Big time, big time, big
So,
time.
Yeah, I can't wait. I already know 2 of the red teamers that are working there. And yeah, I can't wait because they're, way better at any offensive stuff than I've ever been able to do. So
Yeah.
I love the whole back and forth cat and mouse thing. So it's gonna be interesting.
yeah.
Yeah, and if you really want to monitor process tracking, right? Process creation is a thing they tell you to do. It's successful, right? Only do with the successes. Who cares if it failed to execute? The success is what you're after anyway, right? Malware.exe execute.
Yeah.
But if something's running and not stopped, process termination, right? Malware.exe started, malware.exe ended. Process termination is no auditing. So no auditing is bad because you should turn on the 4689 events so that if an IR or a forensics person wants to go look at when or if that funny binary stopped, they'll be able to see that data. Also, if you're trying to link processes together because the process IDs get reissued, you need to know when that terminus happens so you can look back in time and say, here's where it started, here's where it ended. So another flaw with the benchmark, but that's a minor one when you look at the whole gist of what they break.
But endpoint security is going to save us, right?
Right. That's another podcast.
All of the agents are out there are going to save us.
We
So we
have
don't need your
stories.
crappy logging, cheat sheet thing. We're saved.
Pen testers are actually the sad fact is LogMD did better than any of the solutions in collecting the details of what the malware did, and nobody was even close, to be honest. So good logging is worth its weight in gold if you're really wanting to know what happened on the box. Which is why a lot of the solutions collect the kernel level process execution with command line, because it's usually valuable. It tells you a lot.
So is it safe to say that some of these solutions came out before command line logging was
mainstream?
Mainstream in Windows, and it was, these solutions were there to solve that problem in particular. I don't know what's running, when it started, when it terminated, what it did. And then all of a sudden command line logging came out, and it was like, wow, now we can for free implement a lot of the things that these other solutions were designed to fill, that particular gap of, right?
Yeah. My take was from looking at, I think a reason a lot of these people like this data is they've never had it before, and they see these solutions provide you all this data. Wow, look at all this data. Wow, I can see the command line execution, everything else. You know what? If you turn the Windows logging cheat sheet on and you did good logging, you would have all the data they have, period. And you can organize it better because log management is better for dealing with this kind of data, assuming it's a decent log management solution, like being able to exclude something and say, not this, not this, not this, because IR and forensics people and blue teamers know what's generally normal and can filter out a whole lot of stuff very quickly. But yeah, they did it because this isn't mainstream. Not everybody has it, and it kind of provides you a kind of a logging through an endpoint solution, so I don't have to build that log management infrastructure. And there's an advantage there, I think, for a lot of people because it's cloud-based in some cases. I think most of them have moved to the cloud, so you don't have to build anything. You just throw an agent on there, all the data's up in the cloud, and you log into your console, and you start, hunting and pecking and looking to see what you can see. So they did take advantage of some of the stuff that we learned, and they just developed a specific product for it. And that's definitely what it looks like to me.
I see.
Well, I think going back to the compliance thing, it's important to from the get-go, if your company decides that they need some sort of a benchmark compliance, or they have one now, that this is a starting point, not a finish line. Most IT departments will say, okay, well, CIS is going to be hard, and then when they implement it, they're like, okay, we have security now, let's move on to that other project we were discussing, right? That it's got to be for just a baseline setting, not, okay, we're good with security, right? We're done.
Yeah. But
correct. The problem is, what do they how do they know when they say it's a place to start, right? Unfortunately, the benchmark tells you to set your logs at a measly, really, what's the smallest hard drive you can get in a machine today? 256 gigs?
250, yeah.
512? I'm thinking they're probably all bigger than that if you buy a brand new one today, which means I'm asking for a measly gig for one log. That's, by default in Windows. The rest, 256, is more than enough. We get you a month's worth of data. That the fact that they haven't addressed something as simple as log sizes, and so they look at the benchmark, it tells it to set it to 89K. Have you ever looked at an 89K log in a domain controller? You're going to be lucky to have a minute's worth of data. So they really don't understand, I think, in the course of these benchmark designs, oh, but it'll fill up disk. Oh, but it'll eat CPU, and not anymore. Maybe 5-10 years ago when we started this conversation, but not today.
Yeah.
So the problem is, how do they know? It's a place to start, but I think the benchmarks need to have a data in there that says, oh, by the way, here's some known settings that you might want to consider and the potential impact to them, or, and IR and forensics and investigators will definitely want this data. And oh, by the way, you might want to consider it. Unless it's in there, the place to start is more like, well, this is all it says to do. The analyst didn't know to go look somewhere else. Where does it tell you in the benchmark to go look somewhere else for more data? Unless they're listening to this podcast or happen to read the logging cheat sheets. So that's the problem with these, is they're taken as real news, right? That's all I know. I read it. It's published on the internet. It's a good reputation organization that do good work, but it's not enough, and nowhere in there does it say you might want to consider additional stuff.
Well, the CIS benchmarks were bought, I don't know if that's the thing, by Tripwire. So now they're kind of owned or maintained by Tripwire.
When did that happen?
A little while ago.
Was that when Sands dumped off the top 20 to him?
I want to say it's probably around the same time. But yeah, they're the 800
challenge.
Challenge.
Oh,
that's kind of like because then it can be self-serving to be very much promotions of a product, right?
Yeah.
And so that kind of scares me if that's the case.
All right, we're live Googling or DuckDuckGoing, depending on your.
Don't worry,
go quack it.
Yeah, this will make it in. This will make it in.
Quack. Hold on, well, bet your quacks.
Tappy. Okay, so the Center for
it's either ducks or crickets.
Yeah, cricket.
Hold on, I have crickets. I can turn the crickets back on.
So the CIS benchmarks is a 501c3 not-for-profit. Okay, so apparently it's still out there and available. But okay, so if this is something that is I don't know why I thought they were owned by Tripwire. Weird. Huh.
The big change I know that occurred was that Sands didn't want to support the top 20 anymore and has turned that over to the committee. Mm-hmm. I think another challenge is CIS has so many items now that that the challenge here is they're adding AWS, they're adding wireless, blah blah blah. They're adding all these additional benchmarks for these vertical apps and architectures that the effort to go back and tweak all these or keep these up to date, I think, is a bit of a challenge for them.
Well, it takes years for an RFC to actually become something. So if these need revamping, are they considered best practices anymore if they're actually outdated?
I'm going to say no. I'm going to say the best practice of CIS is it's lacking log sizes is definitely one, right? So it's definitely in enabling certain logs. I mean, it blows my mind. Task scheduler log, enabling it is not a benchmark item. Windows logging cheat sheet it is, as well as logmd in the output. We tell you setting the PowerShell logs. That's another thing that's not on the benchmarks. How can today, with everything we know about PowerShell, there's no recommendations to turn on PowerShell logging? And that's only PowerShell 5 enhanced logging has only been around for what, 2 years, and year release and 2 years in beta.
Yeah. Well, isn't it easy? And we've seen examples of where you can actually disable the logging in the command line as well. So, I mean, they bad guys can get around that stuff and disable that.
Not as easy as that. Definitely not as easy as that. So there is noise that is made in the course of doing that. And if you're sending that stuff to, so it's detectable that that condition occurs. And someone says, you collect local logs, but some of the bad guys can clear it. Yes, and they absolutely tell me that that's not the machine that I'm going to be looking for information on. I have to go into forensics mode. So I've immediately learned something. I immediately change my gears, and I immediately treat it differently. Just reimage the box. I'm going to look for the boxes that have the data. The Chinese made the mistake in where I was, where they started clearing the logs. One of the two actors that was in the environment through this campaign, or at least two, probably, but we definitely saw one that made no typos, one that made lots of typos and cleared the logs. That's like, a really bad mistake if people are doing log management because you just set up all the alarms. Who's clearing the logs on 12 machines? And so you immediately go looking for the things that executed in log management until the logs were cleared on other boxes where the logs weren't cleared, and suddenly you have all their behavior. So they're really helping you by doing that, right?
Yeah.
And so when these kinds of exploits occur where they're trying to clear the logs or stop, in this case, the logging, this is the thing you're referring to, is where the guy came up with a way to stop the logging. That's very detectable, and you can react very quickly to that kind of thing, and you'll know what's going on, and potentially just immediately take that system offline or reimage it. And then look across your environment for the condition where the log stopped working, right? The lack of data is just as important as the data.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to ask Amanda and Brian here and Mr. Gough, of course. So it's not going to matter that these are old and outdated because compliance folks don't give a crap. They're going to want those done anyway. Just like the passwords issue. We're still wrestling with, 8-character passwords, upper, lower number, special. We're trying to get people to pick passphrases of 12 to 15 or greater, numbers. It's taken us 10 years to get people to start using complex passwords. And by the time, everybody's latched onto the complex password, we're now saying, no, we actually have to be more complex. So it's going to take another 10 to 15 years for everybody to start adopting the 10 to 12 to 15 character passwords. We're not going to solve any problems with CIS benchmarks. People are going to still expect CIS benchmarks to be implemented, even though we can say, well, they're crap. They haven't been updated in 5 years. They still want us to do X, Y, and Z. So what do we do to solve that problem or to help people who are now going, yes, I have the exact same problem. How do I convince my compliance person that these are crap and we shouldn't use them, or that we should do this instead of that?
First of all, tell them to listen to this podcast.
Listen to the podcast.
One.
Right?
Yeah. Okay, so that's good, Mr. Betcher.
And subscribe to it.
Yeah.
Get on our Slack channel.
Wow.
But yeah,
well done,
to be
sir.
serious,
Well done, sir.
Education.
Yeah.
I think they're crappy compliance people if they're just doing that, right?
I think a lot of them are black and white, and I think that a lot of them don't want to have to deal with things like exceptions. When an auditor comes calling, they just want to go, we're CIS compliant. Mark it, done. Move along.
Yeah, I mean, that's the easy answer. But you have to ask yourself, is that in the best interest of the company just to stop there?
I agree.
And I don't know, a business person may say yes.
Yeah.
Right. Because I got to allocate funds and monies, and people in other areas so I can be more profitable.
Yeah. Well, no.
So,
My point was a lot of requirements, a lot of frameworks, a lot of compliance frameworks require you to do some kind of system hardening. So, do you develop your own hardening based on, and I'm using quotey fingers for the theater of the mind, based on CIS benchmarks, and say, okay, we're just going to pick and choose the ones that we want, and to hell with the rest of them. So we're like 40% of the CIS benchmarks are being implemented, or are we going to have to implement all of them? And that's a baseline, like you said, and we're going to go further than that. But with system hardening being a thing, not just network hardening and all that other stuff, how much of the CIS benchmarks can we feel safe implementing and get that, hey, verified by CIS or we're following CIS benchmarks?
Well, keep in mind a lot of tools have CIS compliance checks, right?
Yeah.
Nessus and Nexpose and others, BigFix, and those have these CIS benchmark checks to see if you're compliant to what you're looking at, right? I think I'm going to split up hardening into two portions. The CIS benchmarks that do hardening, not a bad thing to do. What I always have told people in hardening when we did the methodology at HP is your standard should be, I set everything. This is actually what you should write in your standard. Too many organizations rewrite their own standards, meaning they recreate everything from scratch. They shouldn't do that. They should reference in the first paragraph, we set everything in the CIS benchmark, unless otherwise specified in the addendum, additional items area, or the exceptions area, and then you create the proper paperwork and get the sign off and all that, so that the auditor immediately knows everything in the benchmark is set, but these 5 things, because we can't do it because we'll break something, or they think they'll break something. And we've also set these additional items. Now, and as far as what people should do from that perspective, now hardening, I'm going to take out advanced auditing because significant improvements have been made since these benchmarks have been seriously reviewed. So the typical hardening, yeah, okay, SMB1, turn it off. Yep. Microsoft's going to take that away from you because, again, they think they're smarter than everybody else. That's going to break some stuff, but that's okay. I think it's a good thing that they start pushing some people on those kinds of settings because that's a pretty old setting. We obviously just had the big outbreak of that problem and what it did with the not Petya taking advantage of all that. And so I think you can say do the benchmarks for the hardening portion, not the advanced auditing. Take the advanced auditing, but then use the Windows logging cheat sheets. They've been out there for 5 years. The Windows logging one for sure has been out there 5 years, and it's very well known. I've seen it referenced in very large companies, base build information and documents. It's talked and used and referenced all over the place, downloaded tons, and say, look at the difference. If you want to check your system to see what the difference is, go download the free version of LogMD and run the report. You'll see exactly what the delta is between Windows logging cheat sheet, USGCBs, and CIS. And you can then take that delta and say, here's why we're wanting to do these additional 5, 6, 7, 8 items, because these are security professionals that keep this stuff up to date, and they can. Let's read some articles. I'm going to have to write an article about this, obviously, in my blog to try to explain why these things are important, above and beyond what the podcast is going to talk about. And so start at the CIS. But then understand there is additional resources that do go one or more steps further, and that it's a good thing to focus that. So now I would say your standard would be, I'm going to apply everything on CIS, and in advanced auditing, I'm going to do what the Windows logging cheat sheet says, which sets these additional 5, 6, 7 items. Justify it if you have to, if your people want it justified. And then I'm not going to do these settings because it's going to break these applications that we have, yada, yada, yada. And that's your standard. Then you have a lot less to maintain, and you still reference the CIS benchmark, and you only have to monitor for any changes, which they do a pretty good job in the change management of it, telling you what's altered.
Yeah.
And when you implement the CIS in your organization, it's kind of easy to say, okay, Bill, you're in charge of SCCM or GPO or whatever. Just implement the CIS benchmarks in our environment. Go. And then it's pretty well referenced, right? They know there's a lot of documentation on that, how to get your entire organization CIS compliant when it comes to either OS or database or whatever like that. So that's easy for you to do. Just say, hey, reference the CIS, get everything compliant with that, and then you're done. Okay. Right? And then you can start adding additional things to that.
Yep.
So Amanda, did you ever ask people, your clients at your old job, to add those things? Because you were an MSSP, right? So being secure was kind of your job, making them secure. Did you ever ask them to harden boxes when they were building things out?
We didn't offer that technically as a service. That was just more of a my own peace of mind, because I couldn't let them do bad things all the time thing.
Right.
So if it came up where I could mention something like that, where I didn't think it would be overstepping my bounds, I would definitely bring that kind of stuff up.
How was that overstepping bounds, though?
Because we were only paid to do Splunk and logging related things.
So you weren't paid to think; you were just paid to monitor Splunk.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
They are supposed to take care of all of their infrastructure and stuff. I'm there to kind of give them advice when they need it. I attempted several times to do like full reviews and stuff like that of environments, but most of the time it wasn't anything anybody was interested in.
Well, couldn't it have been argued that the additional logging protections would have made your job that much easier?
Well, if it came down to logging, yeah, like we mentioned that kind of stuff all the time. Like we would tell them, like we brought up the Windows logging cheat sheet all the time, and yeah, then I mean, other hardening stuff we didn't really go over a whole lot, but if it had to do with logging, yeah.
Here's an example in Amanda's book that last time we were chatting, I was like reading through it, and I came to this image in the back of the chapter on logging, and there's an image of my ransomware Splunk thing. The CIS benchmark settings would not allow you to catch that behavior.
Exactly.
So there's a perfect example where Amanda referenced an image in a book with settings that I have in the cheat sheet to catch that kind of attack, and CIS says, don't bother.
Yeah.
Yeah, so all we need to do now is to get a hold of the CISsecurity.org folks and say, update your stuff, and then they'll start the long, arduous process of doing so.
Isn't that a full volunteer organization, though?
Yes, we pay money into it. HP paid into it, and large organizations paid into it, and they're organized meetings, and you communicate. They have an agenda, and you go through it. It's a committee, so it's painfully slow. Especially in the Windows realm, people really complain or worry about impact to so many systems. So it would be a very painful thing to discuss and get serious buy-in on this, because it's a very conservative organization from that perspective.
Okay.
I don't know how easy it would be to get some of these things adopted.
Okay. So in summary, make sure that if you're setting all your file associations and everything, and go back and listen to about the first 20 minutes of this show and re-enable all the things that you added to protect yourselves against malware if you updated on Windows 10. And also use the Windows logging cheat sheet and advanced logging to protect yourself further than CIS benchmarks. So.
And watch Hacker Hurricane blog. I will be writing something in the coming weeks that will describe these two problems to get them recorded and locked in so people can refer to them and get the details of what it is. And they will be then forwarded to individuals within said organizations.
Nice.
Oh, he's
I have a handful of your stuff already bookmarked, so.
Betcher just held up the book with the image of the ransomware attack.
Page 232 for reference.
And see, I didn't even know that was you until the first time you were on this podcast. I'm like, oh my god! And I finally
we know people, Amanda.
Made the connection.
We know people.
It happens when I mention that in the talk. Someone comes up, you wrote the cheat sheets? I've been using those for years, man. Thank you. It's so good. Blah, blah, blah. It's like,
Yep.
It's my contribution to the community to try and make things better. And as Betcher can attest to, we, when you do what those cheat sheets say, man, they are worth their weight in gold and data.
Awesome.
And it helps the forensics guys if you actually have something that you really need to implement forensics on. All that data's in the log locally. Holy crap. That is gold.
Yeah, you have definitely helped our jobs immensely if that data is there locally. You have to live through an incident where that stuff is collected and then compare it to a system, which I did. I had Windows 7 that did not have it. I had Windows 8 and 2012 server that did have it, and you compare the two night and day. I know exactly what the bad guys did on these boxes. I have an idea that these things are executed, but I don't have any details. Significant improvement. We're talking, endpoint EDR type.
You're saving hours.
Yeah.
Days, weeks.
Well, I mean, assuming the logs are actually still locally on the box, and the bad guy hasn't removed them. So, all right. Well, we are far over our time. Normally, we are sitting at about 50 minutes, but I think this is good stuff. I mean, this is straight blue team stuff that people need to know about, and if you you might have just gotten screwed if you're actually running Windows 10 in your environment and did the creators update. So make sure you check all your settings there. So
Yeah, you might want to re-image and go back. Or like one of the tweet people said, I went back to Windows 7 because it kept breaking my stuff.
I can't go back to Windows 7.
Yeah,
I like
that's the reason. You got three more years before they turn that off.
Oh, that's true.
Maybe Microsoft will fix it by then.
I'm just gonna throw this away as soon as we're done with this podcast.
Oh, you want to make Windows 10 usable? Get a add-on called Start 10. It's a menu system that kind of makes it Windows 7 usable. It really makes Windows 10 usable.
No, her computer's just a complete POS. It's only got 8 gigs.
The
of
computer's
RAM.
bad. I can't help you there.
It's the finest 80 gig drive.
It's not that bad.
Buy.
It's got an i5 and 8 gig of RAM and all SSDs, and it's still just
creeps.
I used a Mac for the last 2 years, and now I'm angry.
Yeah, I completely understand. So let's put this in the can. So Mr. Gough, how would people get a hold of you if they wanted to discuss more logging and the malwares and stuff?
You can tweet me at Hacker Hurricane. You can go to my blog at Hacker Hurricane, and of course, malwarearchaeology.com is the website where you can find the famous Windows logging cheat sheets, and of course, the infamous Betcher and Gough project of LogMD at log-md.com.
So the check's in the mail, right? You guys are gonna give me some money, a little kickback here for pimping out your stuff all the time like this.
Okay, I'm gonna keep that check because I pimp out the podcast every time I do one of my talks.
God. Okay. All right. Fine. Fine.
He actually does.
Fine.
You can go watch the videos on Iron Geek. You will see me doing it.
Damn it. All right. Fine. We'll take it in payment like that. So, Ms. Amanda, how would people get a hold of you if they wanted to discuss your brand new job, or maybe if they need whatever services your new company does? Perhaps I'm trying to get you. I'm trying to get you in good with your new job already. So
at InfoSister on Twitter.
That's SYSTIR info. SYSTIR.
It is.
All right. So the real brains behind LogMD, Mr. Betcher, how would people get a hold of you if they wanted to discuss?
Well, a couple of ways. You can hit me up on Twitter at Betcherpwned, BOETTCHERPWNED. I gotta say, I'm real impressed with the Slack channel for breaking down security. There are, we're getting close to 1,000 now people in that community, right?
I think we're about 600.
It is a great resource for all things. I mean, we were talking about file associations on the Slack channel, and a couple of the guys came up with some great recommendations, right, for file association changes, and we actually implemented those. Michael changed the website on the fly, because of some of the things. And if you are interested in any particular field, there's all kinds of things. I'm on the malware and reverse engineering channel all the time, looking at the updates there. So like-minded people who are interested in the same things, you can have really educated, interesting discussions with those people. So I really recommend joining the Breaking Down Security Slack channel. And so,
very cool. How would they do that, since you're pimping out the
there's like some kind of URL that you're fixing to say
/AC392569. No, that's not it.
No.
Please don't make it
we're
that.
muting Michael Gough now.
breaksec.signup.team.
breaksec.signup.team. That's right. HTTPS, of course, breaksec.signup.team. It's just the bot that's going to allow you to get in. So,
please join.
Yeah,
if you know what's good for you.
We're also running our PowerShell class through there. Mick Douglas did 5 weeks of PowerShell class with us. It's fantastic. We got our last class on Monday night, but the videos will be made available on our YouTube channel, so that's awesome. Our next class, I'm actually looking for somebody who can do an intro to reverse engineering course. I actually reached out to a couple of people on Twitter, but they don't want to reply back. So
sort of like you.
Oh, too soon. Too soon. Look, I don't use the phone. Okay, I don't.
You didn't even reply back to the Twitter.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I replied back to that. I apologize. Okay, you're right. My bad. I will do better with my correspondence on there. So, Yeah, we're we got all kinds of stuff going on. I wanted to go through the DerbyCon CTF, but I think we're gonna have to wait till next week because we went over. Sorry to the people I said we would talk about that on this show. So yeah, we have a lot of stuff going on over there. So next class, I'd love to do an intro to reverse engineering. So if you're interested in maybe doing that, we can make it a paying gig depending on how many people show up to it. So we are paying our instructors now because we're all popular and stuff.
Fancy.
So we had like 25 people for the PowerShell class. That was awesome. Plus another like 15 who wanted the videos before we released them. So that was pretty awesome. So the BreakSec podcast is at BreakSec on Twitter, BRAKESEC. And you can follow me, Brian Brake, on Twitter, BRYANBRAKE. I appreciate all our Patreon donors, including Mr. Phillips, Marine in Camp Pendleton, who came on today and supported us. Really awesome guy. He's going to be transitioning out of the military in about 6 to 9 months. So if you're looking for somebody in the San Diego area to do red teaming or anything, he might be available, and he's on our Slack. So please join us if you're interested in helping out a Marine who is transitioning to civilian life. So we've got a job board as well. So I hooked him up on the job board. So
No way.
I did. Actually, I pointed him to some Qualcomm jobs that were on there. They're looking for some like junior SOC dudes. So if you're interested in learning, doing some junior SOC stuff for Qualcomm, they're looking for people like 3 to 5 years of experience. And they're also looking for some SOC people. So, all right, that was it for this week. We come back. I'll be back from St. Louis. We're recording this on the 18th of August. So I'll go see the eclipse, and we'll be back next week for a new episode. So thank you, Michael. Please come back again.
Wait a minute. You're going to St. Louis to watch the eclipse, but yet you live in Seattle where it's coming right by you.
No, dude, the traffic on the 5 down to Oregon is just going to be awful. And we've already planned this for like a year. So we're going to see my family, and we're going to see some friends and stuff too. So we're just going to have a big eclipse party and get drizzunk. So yeah, that's it. All right, everyone, have a great week. This was Breaking Down Security. Be good to one another, and have a great week. We'll talk to you again soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
And we're done. Awesome.
Oh my god.
As the car goes by.
Well,
I heard the cricket.
I love the crickets.
Dude, I went to talk like 3 or 4 times. So I live. I know you would have been able to hear it on the recording. So I live not too far, maybe a quarter mile away from train tracks.
Oh yeah.
And they are every 5 minutes.
Oh.
Dang.
And
Choo.
I also had sirens go by and very loud motorcycles. And my neighbor pulled in and was closing car doors, and then my child came out on the porch. It's been a nightmare today. So
It's okay.
I'm glad.
It's okay. You'll get a brand new MacBook next week. It'll be awesome.
Yeah.
Go to the Apple store and pick it
I
up.
literally emailed him as we were on the podcast. I'm like, I need to know if I'm getting a MacBook because I'm just gonna pull the trigger and buy one because I don't care anymore.
Genius.